ever revealed. They never said, hey, Dr. Harrington died, but don't worry, we've taken his discovery and we're going to reveal it to the world. No, not a word was said about it. Those plates were obviously confiscated and secured somewhere so that no one would ever know what happened. And what the discovery was that Dr. Harrington was about to tell them that this object was indeed where he had calculated it to be, and it was indeed moving toward our solar system, which you would expect it to happen because the sun is so huge. This object has to be pulled in by our sun. It has to be. The sun is 1/3 of a million Earth masses, so its gravitational pull is incredibly great.
Tremendous.
And this object is even stated. Here's your proof right here, and nobody has ever picked up on this. This is really solid evidence. They tell you in this article, New York Times, January 30th, 1983. I'm going to quote, recent calculations by the United States Naval Observatory have confirmed the orbital perturbations exhibited by Uranus and Neptune, which Dr. Thomas C. Van Flandern, an astronomer at the observatory, says could be explained by, quote, a single undiscovered planet. He and a colleague, Dr. Robert Harrington, now deceased, they calculate, etc., that the 10th planet should be 2 to 5 times more massive than Earth. We know that's grossly understated. It's much greater than that. Again, I believe they must have been told to phony up to, going to kill you. So, I mean, it's easy to be skeptical, but when a bullet is coming towards you, you don't have time to deny it.
That's right. Just because you can't believe you'd ever be shot doesn't change the fact that the bullet's coming for you. So absolutely. I mean, you know, when you talk about the newspaper articles, we've discussed the spot disappearing from Jupiter and from Neptune and Saturn's ring, one of the rings disappearing, and things like that. Then you get into Dr. Harrington, who announces that. That's why I say never announce I'm gonna get the facts and I'm gonna release them next week or any. When you get, wait until you have them and then put them out there, because these dirt balls will kill you quick. And and that's just another piece of evidence that, okay, what the hell are they hiding? And I think you've got it pretty much put together, buddy.
Right. And you know what? Here's another piece of evidence that they murdered Dr. Harrington. We have the obituary on the internet. The U.S. Naval Observatory did an obituary for their chief astronomer, the death of their chief astronomer, Dr. Robert S. Harrington. And in that obituary, they made a big blunder. They tried to cover up any possibility that people would suspect that Dr. Harrington was murdered. And in their attempt to cover up that murder suspicion, they actually increased the suspicion that he was murdered. What they said was a blatant lie. They said in the obituary that Dr. Harrington had lost all interest in his search for Planet X.
I've seen that.
In his later years, and this was diametrically opposite to the truth. The truth was Dr. Harrington's whole life revolved around it, and he was at the apex of his discovery, ready to announce it to the world, to become the most famous astronomer in the world, making the greatest discovery of anything, any discovery in all of modern history. In fact, that discovery is greater than any other political occurrence that puny man could have ever made, any great historical events that man made on this earth.
And it would have clearly showed that NASA was lying to us all along, because how could they say they didn't know about it when here's just a regular guy, who's got the goods?
And how could they say that he lost all interest in Planet X during his later years, which is a blatant lie. How could they make such a stupid, if they had just been quiet and not even offered that ludicrous lie that Dr. Harrington had lost interest in Planet X during his last years, they might have, they would have had a better case for covering up the truth. But now they've really made it blatantly obvious that they've murdered Dr. Harrington just by that lie in his official obituary by the U.S. Naval Observatory.
Well, you know why I think they did that? They did that because they knew that anybody who had any interest in Planet X was going to read that. And it's pretty much a slap to your face saying, this could be you. That's what I think.
Well, that's a possibility, yeah. I mean, that's surely possible. But look at what they're doing, though. They're exposing their lie to the world. Well, thank goodness we're here to flag it and to tell everyone, hey, look, if you need to believe that this thing is true because you need to protect your life. Now, it's like it would be one thing if it was just an academic argument over how many angels could dance on the head of a pin. That wouldn't really affect people's lives very much.
No.
But this thing, the question of does this object exist, and if it does exist, it is by the laws of basic physics, it is being gravitationally pulled into our solar system, and by the laws of basic physics, its magnetic and gravitational forces will give Earth a new facelift and pull land masses up from the depths of the sea and sink land masses to the depths of the sea, which is what has happened in the past.
Well, we're seeing that now. We're seeing islands popping up in places throughout the ocean, and while seeing other ones disappearing.
That's right. You're right. And Edward Casey, the psychic, and you've got to believe when psychics make predictions, because it's just amazing the things that they are able to predict and the healing that they're able to effect on people. They're all proven to be not only psychics predicting cataclysmic events in the distant future, but they've also proven to be great healers. And these are gifts obviously from God. Even though God does not always choose Christians or Jewish prophets or Israelite prophets as his spokesman to warn mankind. He chooses American Indians. He chooses people from various cultures around the world, the most unlikely people he chooses as his prophets. Jim Singer was one of the prophets, a man who was nothing more than a factory manager in Canada, common man, was suddenly given these visions by God of great natural disasters. And he and his wife were just talking, and on the videotape that I have, they both described that there was no supernatural occurrence that they had ever had, or no supernatural experience. They were just discussing their plans, how they were going to spend their weekend, and suddenly Jim Singer went into a trance. He stiffened up, and his wife thought he was having a heart attack. That's what she said. And he just wouldn't talk. He was silent. He was in a trance. And Jim Singer describes what happened. He said that a man came up to me, to an angel, some kind of a man, and he showed me that there would be a plane crash. The plane crash, I didn't know where it was, where it would be, but it would just be in green fields. And sure enough, weeks later, he read of a plane crash in green cornfields where there was incredible survival in this crash when people should have been killed. And so many people survived. I don't have all the details of the crash, but in the vision, Jim said that this angel, or maybe it was God, we don't know, told him that they will feel my power as I save their lives. They will call out to me. Of course, everybody calls out to God in a plane crash. All atheists call out to God at the moment the plane is plunging to the earth. And God told, or this angel told, it must have been God, because he said, they will feel my power as I save them from this disaster.
Well, as the old saying goes, there's no atheists in foxholes.
Right. That's absolutely true. I have experienced that myself firsthand. But anyway, so there's a case of a prophet. And then he said in further visions, other visions that Jim Singer had, often the visions and after God has fulfilled his purpose of bringing the message to his chosen prophet. And then a person no longer is a prophet. He just picks up the message that is given to him. But in other visions later on, Jim Singer was told that there would be great disasters. He was shown images of people wandering about dazed in the midst of huge social upheaval, where everyone was suffering. People were wandering around begging for a glass of water, and they were dying of thirst. And it was a horrible situation, and planes coming in, trying to rescue people. Gordon Michael Scallion talks about the same thing. He may have lost his prophetic, may no longer be a prophet, but he described the same visions that he had, where Gordon Michael Scallion was just an ordinary guy. He was in technical field, and this was all described in an ABC documentary titled Ancient Prophecies. You might be able to see that on YouTube. I have it. I should put the episodes of Ancient Prophecies on YouTube. But Gordon Michael Scallion was just giving a lecture on to people, colleagues, for his as a consultant in electronics and high technology. And all of a sudden, he lost his voice, and he went into basically a trance, and he was taken to a hospital, and he began to see these visions. And what he saw was the earth, the oceans themselves, he said, buckled. The oceans themselves buckled, and land masses protruded upward from the sea. Mm-hmm. So it's horrific to imagine these visions that these men got. He said, I couldn't sleep. I had to go to sleep for 3 days. I was so fatigued from these visions. And you know, the prophet Daniel in the Bible, 600 BC, said the same thing. He had visions given to him from God. He described the visions, which describe actually, believe it or not, in Daniel chapter 7, the rise that God has given to Daniel, the rise of the Great British Empire, the rise of the American Empire, the rise of the Nazi Empire, and the rise of the Russian Bolshevik Empire was given to Daniel in around 600 BC. So, you know, God has chosen many prophets. One of the greatest was Edgar Casey, the sleeping prophet.
Yeah.
And these guys were all great healers, too. Every one of them had the ability to look into a person, even if that person was not present, and determine what their illness was, and it actually saved their lives. I mean, the tangible evidence of Edgar Casey's life-saving healing is all documented in a huge library at the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Huge library documenting his trance. When he went into a trance, he would diagnose a particular patient who wrote to him, or a family member of that patient who was dying and had an incurable disease. And Casey never met the person. He lived hundreds of miles away from that person. And yet, in this trance, they would tell him that, for example, Laura has a terrible sore on her leg. The doctors want to amputate it. How can we save her leg? So Edgar Casey went into a trance. This is many, many different trances that he had gone into that were all recorded by his wife and his secretary and documented at the library. But this one, Edgar Casey went into a trance and said, we are now on State Street. We're now passing the street, another street walker, and we are entering a blue house. Something's burning in the kitchen on the stove. There's a pot boiling. We're going upstairs. Now we have the body. The body is lying on a bed. We are going through the heart, through the lungs, through the arteries. Now we have found the cause, the source. Yes, her leg is festering badly. She has been bitten by a tiny brown recluse spider while sleeping one night. The cure would be oil of smoke. Bancroft Pharmacy, top shelf, Chicago. Bancroft Pharmacy, top shelf. Well, they called. He woke up. He had no idea what he had said in the trance. He never knew what he said. They called Bancroft Pharmacy, and Bancroft Pharmacy said, "No, we don't have it. That oil of smoke, that company went out of business. I'm looking at the shelf. I don't see any oil of smoke here at all." They went out of business about 1910, 1915. So they did another reading with Edgar Casey, and he said, "No, oil of smoke in a trance. The oil of smoke is on the shelf behind the blue bottle." So they called back Bancroft Pharmacy, and the pharmacist looked behind the blue bottle and said, "Oh yeah, I didn't even see it back there. Okay, I'll send it to you right away." There is a miracle from God.
That's fascinating.
This was documented. This is not hearsay, but it was documented on ABC, the famous ABC television documentary titled Ancient Prophecies, which I have on videotape, and I transferred to DVD, and I have to put the episodes of it onto YouTube.
Fascinating. Yeah, I've seen those. I've seen some of those, and I do remember that story. And you see documentation like that, and how can you deny that people are really connecting somewhere and getting these answers? I mean, it's obvious.
It's God. Actually, it has to be God, because Satan does not like to heal. Satan kills. So God gives messages to His chosen servants, and you just can't bargain with God to become a prophet.
No.
If he either chooses you or He doesn't choose you. He chooses some people to be comforters, some people to be an encourager. I think God has chosen me to be an encourager, to help people and inspire them, but not a prophet. No. Other people are chosen to be prophets, but you get the role that God gives you. And some American Indians, have exhibited the prophecy. As I said, Gordon Michael Scallion, an American who's still alive today. Edgar Casey, who died around 1941, saved many, many lives. In his,
he served his purpose, and
but but you know what, Michael? Here's the important thing: these healers predicted the end of the world. They predicted pole shifts. Edgar Casey, in his trance, I'm going to paraphrase or repeat some of the things that have been documented when he was in these trances curing people. He would come up with these uncalled for prophecies about global catastrophes. And of course, this was part of God's plan, not only to heal people, but to warn the world about what is about to happen unless people begin to make themselves seek out God in their minds spiritually and find the God who created them, who brought this miraculous body into being, our own human body, and the miraculous world on which we thrive.
Well, my body was
seek out that God and not just take this life as something that we happen to be here, enjoy it, and then die.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. We've got to take another break to go with John. And so, John, we're back. And where would you like to go now? I know we were talking about preparedness in the beginning, but I don't think we completed that. I don't know.
Yeah, we could touch on that in a few minutes.
Sure.
I wanted to finish up on the scientific evidence that I had drifted myself away from the crux of the point that I was getting to, reading this article from the New York Times, January 30th, 1983, heralding the launch of the infrared astronomical satellite, which they had dedicated solely to sighting Planet X. Well, in this paragraph it says, Dr. Van Flandern says that this pulling on the outer planets could be explained by a single undiscovered planet. He and Dr. Harrington, and I'll just quote what we had already passed over what we said about the size of planet X. Harrington and Van Flandern were the two astronomers searching for planet X, and they said that they believe that it's about 5 billion miles, quoting from the article in the New York Times, about 5 billion miles beyond the orbit of Pluto. Hardly next door, but still within the gravitational influence of the sun. Now that is such a telling, powerful piece of evidence, that one little quote. What Dr. Harrington and Dr. Flandern are stating here in the New York Times, is that this object, though it's 5 billion miles away, it is still within the gravitational influence of the sun. That's what they state right here. Being under the gravitational influence of the sun, there is nowhere for this, these are my own words now, there's nowhere for this planet X to travel but toward the sun. Just as, for example, if you were to put a ball bearing on a table, on a kitchen table, and lay a huge magnet on that, in the center of that table, if that ball bearing were placed close enough even within the outer fringes of the gravitational force field of that powerful magnet, that ball bearing would slowly begin to roll toward the magnet. And as you know, as you can visualize, that ball bearing would begin to accelerate quite readily, quite rapidly, until it would seem to fly right into the magnet. And that's what somebody once told me a story about an MRI, magnetic resonance imaging thing in the hospital, a system where people get MRIs, and they had put a huge, massive stand-up oxygen tank too close to the MRI. So when the electromagnetic field was generated, it sucked that tank right in to the MRI, into the machine. So that just shows what happens when an object gets even within the outer fringes of a magnetic field. It slowly moves, but then accelerates quite rapidly. Well, that's what would happen to planet X. Even though it's not a magnetic field, it's a gravitational force field that the sun is generating. And it works the same way as a magnetic field. It's pulling this object in close, so it is inevitable. It is inexorable. There's no way to stop it. It's coming in. It's not going to hit the sun. It's coming in the past every 36.5 centuries because it's a celestial pendulum. Like clockwork, it comes in every 36.5 centuries, and it doesn't hit Earth, doesn't hit the sun, but it loops around the sun and slingshots in the manner that I described before. So it sends it back out where it then, like the tennis ball that's whacked from the player in the near court to the player on the far court, 36.5 centuries ago. So anyway, we've got evidence that this thing is bound to come in. There's no way to stop it, and this is absolute proof that it is coming in. But going back to time interval and showing you the regular precision chronological indexing of the visitation of this object every 36.5 centuries, like clockwork, the celestial pendulum comes in. Well, you go back and you can see scientists, and I forget the guy's name, but any scientist, not just this scientist or this ecologist, they've discovered that tree rings on trees around 1630 BC became very much narrowed for several years, for a number of years. Why would that occur? Well, because when this object comes in, it causes tremendous heating of the Earth's molten and solid core and the Earth's mantle, and you have tremendous gaseous and flux fluid of metal and rock emanating from the Earth in the form of volcanoes. Magma is forced out with great heat, and hundreds of volcanoes around the world begin to erupt simultaneously. This causes nuclear winter effect with ash in thickly blanketing the entire atmosphere of planet Earth, so that we have found, and if you go to Wikipedia, you can find out that trees in England, in the British Isles, trees in Americas were all exhibited, well, maybe prehistoric, what they call petrified trees. You ever hear of the petrified forest? Well, some of those trees, they were able to detect that the tree rings were very much narrowed. I read that in Wikipedia, and they found out that all of them indicated that the narrowing of the tree rings occurred around 1630 BC. And that would be roughly 36.5 centuries ago. So we're getting close to the return of Planet X. Getting back to prophecy, we were talking about Edgar Cayce and what a great healer he was. And all these healers had the gift. For some reason, they would have this dual ability to predict future disasters. Well, Edgar Cayce, in his trances, where he was healing many, many people who had incurable diseases, in his trances he would come up with these unrelated prophetic statements. And some of these statements were, well, I have the book titled Edgar Cayce on Atlantis, compiled by his son Hugh Lynn Cayce. And in that book, and in the Ancient Prophecies ABC TV special documentary, Edgar Cayce is quoted as saying in his trances, the greater portion of Japan must go into the sea. And he also is quoted as saying, San Francisco, Los Angeles, both of these must be destroyed before New York. And he also said that what is the coastline of many a land will become the bed of the ocean. And he also said that in his trances that the earth there will be a shifting of the poles, such as what was the more tropical, what was the more frigid will become the more tropical.
And let me ask
you, a geographical pole shift.
Let me ask you this quick question that came in the chat a little while ago. One listener wants to know if it would be survivable above ground. Do you have a chance if you're not underground?
Fritz Hermann, I believe his name is, and he shows us in this documentary, Mega Tsunami. You could check that out on YouTube, Mega Tsunami.
Okay.
And you'll see he did large scale, small scale experimentation with huge masses into large bodies of water in a laboratory, and also computer calculations that show that when this island, half trillion tons of western flank of the Cumbre Vieja volcanic mountain slides into the ocean, it will cause such a tidal wave, such that the initial wave, when it plops into the ocean, will be about the height of 2 Empire State Buildings. Then it will sort of level off and smooth down as it travels through the depths of the ocean at a speed of 450 miles an hour. It'll take 8 hours to get from the west coast of Africa to New York, Boston, Miami, Charlotte, etc. And in 8 hours, that tsunami wave, and when it gets to the shallower shores of the Atlantic coast, will rear up, as they all do, as oceanographers will tell you. They rear up because of the shallowness. All that mass of water now has nowhere to go but up, and it forms a huge mountain of water, a tidal wave which they estimate to be about 60 stories, at least, high, and that would inundate all of New York City. We've seen that dramatized in the 2005 movie Day After Tomorrow.
Oh, yeah,
Check
absolutely.
out that movie on YouTube.
Yeah, I believe Art Bell and Whitley Strieber put that together. We've got a call. We've got 978 area code. You're on Late Night in the Midlands. First name, where you're calling from, please.
Yeah, it's James, Michael. How you doing?
Hey, James, how are you?
You good? How you doing, John?
Hi, James.
Are you familiar with former NASA scientist Norman Berggren and the Ringmakers of Saturn?
How do you spell that name?
Norman R. Berggren, Bergrun, and he put out a book called Ringmakers of Saturn. What he claims when the Voyager went blank there, when they was passing the outer planets, he's saying it was really taking some dynamite pictures of huge spacecraft that were making rings around Saturn. It's my belief that these, whatever they're doing over there, is they're trying to make some gravity wave or something to disrupt the orbit of Nibiru coming in. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. Around what time frame did this, you said the Voyager passed and its transmissions were blacked out for a period of time?
You remember that when it passed through the outer planets that they said that they lost the signal, and then when it got past a certain planets, they said all of a sudden the signal come back.
They always lie. Whenever they want to co-opt all the photographs from any kind of observatory space, they always lie and say it failed. They did that. They lied about the Hubble telescope in the same way, and about the Pioneer 10 space probe, which I was just describing before, where they said, "Oh, we lost transmission," but they had not, and they were keeping all the data for themselves, and they wanted to keep that information secret. So it seems quite logical to me and likely to me that yes, these were secret photographs that they were taking, and it was probably something to do with Nibiru's gravitational forces on Saturn. Certainly, because let me tell you, Planet X is the biggest concern in the minds of all the power elite, and the power elite are the ones who determine what NASA does. It's all they use NASA like they use, like you would use a slave, and for their own greedy purposes. And certainly, this is what they really care about. They don't care about furthering knowledge of space for the world, for the scientific community of the world. They care about their own immediate well-being, and they want to know what's happening so they can track this thing and know when they should go underground. They have underground cities that are fabulous, trillion-dollar underground cities, well documented. Photographs have been taken of them, films. So yeah, I believe you're absolutely correct. That was a secret mission that Voyager was on.
You can actually see the photographs if you Google Ringmakers of Saturn. There's videos of his talk and a lot of the spacecraft itself. Did you know that Jordan Maxwell said that Saturn used to look like a big eye and used to look like it was winking at you in ancient times, and then I guess Nibiru come through and perturb it. So that's just something interesting. All right, thanks a lot, Michael.
All right, thank you, James. I appreciate the call.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye. Okay, so interesting, and there's just a little more to add to the big puzzle here, huh?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so the cover-up is really becoming more blatant now because this object is coming closer. And obviously, we know, again, we're going back to basic physics. When an object as huge as this object, and I haven't given you an estimation of the size, but Dr. Robert S. Harrington, before he was murdered, believed that it was a brown dwarf star. And incidentally, that puts to rest the falsehood of that puny estimation that he made. He was probably told to say that so that he wouldn't panic the people. But it puts to rest that falsehood and gives you the truth. When Dr. Harrington simply said, "We believe that it's a brown dwarf star." That's what he said in the New York Times article. And a brown dwarf star, by definition, just look up the definition, the puniest, let's be as conservative as possible in our estimation. The puniest brown dwarf star is defined as 3 Jupiter masses. Okay, now one Jupiter, the mass of Jupiter is 318 Earth masses. So the puniest brown dwarf star that Planet X could be would be 3 Jupiters, or 3 times 318 Earth masses. We're getting close to 1,000 Earth masses. Would be puniest size that Planet X could be, about 1,000 Earth masses. So when this thing comes into our inner solar system and passes over the orbital paths of all the inner planets, it's going to cause terrible destruction. If we happen to be in the season of the year when Earth is, orbiting the sun and far away from Planet X's trajectory, we won't get hurt as badly by the gravitational and magnetic forces of Planet X, but it'll still be devastation. In the last one, during the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, again, when the tree rings were narrowed around 1630 BC, we talked about that with Moses freeing the Israelites from Egypt. God used Planet X to scare the hell out of Pharaoh and the Egyptians and devastate that country so badly that they were forced to release the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, from 400 years of slavery in Egypt. So at that time, the passage of Planet X was probably not as severe as it could have been, because Earth may have been in that season of the year where its orbital path took it around the sun a certain distance away from Planet X, but still there was great devastation. We have historical records from the civilizations that existed around 1630. For example, in the Americas, we have legends going back to the Incas of Peru, and to the Aztecs and the Mexicans and the other tribes who lived there, and they said in Central America and South America that their legends show that there was horrible disasters, flooding, and there was several days when the sun did not shine at all. It was dark, and the windstorms were horrific. Everything was extremely intense. Many people died. They would go into caves to try to protect themselves. And at the very same time, now we look back historically, the same period in history, around 1630 BC, Emperor Yaju in China, in his imperial annals, described great disasters in China at the same time period. However, at that time, there was not 3 days of darkness, as there was in the Americas, but there was 3 days of sunlight. So this tells you that the Earth stood still for several days. And China just happened to be facing the Earth when the Earth was forced by some gravitational force or magnetic force to stand still. China happened to be in its daily rotation facing the sun, and therefore you had 3 days of sunlight in China. The Americas, on the other hand, happened to be in their on the dark side at nighttime when the Earth stood still, so it would remain dark for 3 days. So here you have various cultures around the world all confirming the same disaster, cataclysm that occurred. And Dr. Immanuel Velikovsky, the great visionary of the 1940s and 50s, who was ridiculed for his belief in these cataclysms between planets, he was the one who lined up all the calendars and did corrections in the various calendars of different cultures and proved that the records from all the cultures describing this great catastrophe, these records were all recorded at the same period in China, in the Americas, etc., and in the Middle East. So this shows that there was all the civilizations attest to this catastrophe having occurred. This was when the Egyptians, the Israelites, were freed from bondage, and the Red Sea actually parted. This is not a myth. There's a physical explanation for that. In basic physics, you can explain it. And I can tell you, if you take a basketball, for example, that basketball represents planet Earth. Now, you hold the basketball between your the tips of your two index fingers, your left-hand index finger, your right-hand index finger. And like you've seen people do that before on the sides, both sides of the basketball. Well, where that index, and then you could someone could spin that basketball. Now, where your index finger is, that point doesn't really rotate around the entire ball, does it? It just sort of pivots, right?
Yeah.
on the tips of your fingers. However, the center of the basketball would actually rotate vertically as you spin it. Can you visualize that?
Sure.
Well, the center would be around the Americas, and that's where the pole shift occurred, or some amount of pole shift. Could have been, maybe several degrees, and that's where the pole shift occurred in China, such that what the result was, what the North Pole had up until the Exodus and the Great Disaster of 1650 BC, the North Pole was actually around the state of Wisconsin and Ontario, Canada. That's where the North Pole was.
Well, it feels like we've slid into the north here.
Pardon me?
I'm in the south, and it feels like we slipped into the north here.
Well, yeah, because of the air masses the extraordinarily unusual air masses that are swooping down, and that's all caused by Planet X. I could get into my theory of why we're getting these big Arctic plunges.
Well, we have about 2 more minutes left here. Well, about 3 more minutes left, and I want to give you an opportunity to finish up with whatever you want. But I'd also like to, at some point, I think I mentioned this last time, maybe we can get together and do a video, and I could put that out on my website. We would do a little something extra and put something together.
Yeah, that sounds like a good possibility.
Okay, great. So yeah, you got a few minutes. I just want to thank you quickly before you go into whatever it is you're going to go into, and just say thank you very much for taking time out to be with us. You've become a regular, and I appreciate everything you do, because you don't just throw things out there. You do your research and you bring facts to the table, and I love that.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me and giving me the chance to give information to your listeners so that they can protect themselves, both physically and spiritually, prepare themselves spiritually. Even if I were to live an abundant life with no cares and problems, when I die, what's going to happen to me? And I'm concerned about the eternal life. I know that there is another life after this one. And if people are fearful enough, God often drives people to call out to Him out of fear. Sometimes that's the only way He can save people and bring them into an eternal life, is through fear. And I believe this is what is happening. So I'm glad that you've given me that opportunity to help prepare people both for this life physically and for the next life spiritually.
Well, thank you. And now, you have a Facebook page. Do you actually work that yourself? Do you pay attention to it, or?
I do visit it every couple of days.
Okay. And
I know they post a lot of really good information there.
Yeah, I was on it today, and so that's why I was asking. Is that a good way for people to get in contact with you, or do you have another way that you'd like people to do that?
You can email me at, I get a lot of emails, so I have to really check carefully and make sure I don't miss any new responders. But my email address would be JADINARDO. The last name is DiNardo, DINARDO. My first 2 initials are JA, so it's JADINARDO at optonline.net. That's OPTONLINE. You've probably seen that around, optonline.net.